Good evening. It's a distinct pleasure for me to be here. Not only a pleasure, but indeed an honor. And therefore, tonight what I'd like to do is, as others before me have done, is to share with you some of my most precious personal experiences with Gulen Hizme, as well as my interpretation of it by way of comparing that movement with some other roughly comparable ones in the world. Like a number of other Americans, including scholars among them, the Gulen movement and its service activities were not widely recognized, much less understood by them or by me, until I had the opportunity to travel to Turkey under the auspices of the Rumi Forum a few years ago. Such a journey is a useful, but I would say almost necessary prelude and foundation for any more scholarly inquiry. I think that was a point that was made in the movie that we just saw. Despite my interests as an anthropologist, and I am an anthropologist at the University of Maryland, and one concerned primarily with new religious movements, the so-called cults in colloquial American English, I was unaware of just what the Gulen movement is and just what is its significance in today's complex world. I wish then to share how I came by my current understanding, informed by two hats that I wore and continue to wear. One was that initial one, as tourist, as visitor to Turkey, and the second is that of scholar, which indeed bore its fruits once I returned home and studied further. So tonight I'm, as I say, wearing two hats. One is tourist and one is scholar, as to my tourist hat, if you will. When I made my trip to Turkey, I saw the movement played out in the unique and living culture and the history of its parent country, Turkey. And I think one has to start with that to understand the Gulen movement. I saw the country, its beauty, and its enduring significance for world history, as we've just seen in the movie. There is nothing quite like the cultural tourism introduced by natives, that is, people of that culture, to provide the important grounding. I toured a variety, as we all did, who traveled with under these fine auspices, to encourage the appreciation of other cultures as lived and still living. I visited, and this is just a brief list of some of the things. I saw the country, as I say, its beauty. I visited a wide sampling of individual members of the movement, visiting homes of the movement members, which I think is an almost indispensable people-to-people contribution, to use a phrase from the Eisenhower era. I visited the newspaper, I come from a journalist family, and I visited the newspaper Zaman and met with other media folk. And I think it provided the proof in the pudding, as it were, of the moderate and progressive stance that is in a general and genuine component of the movement in general, as well as its media aspects. I saw how the movement is able to bridge the secular world and the spiritual, sponsoring a generally secular approach to the civil religiosity that has characterized the movement. I encountered and visited a wide range of educational efforts of the movement, from primary schools to secondary schools, and at least one university, a very distinguished one I now appreciate. I visited a number of sites where the movement was engaged in humanitarian and other marvelous activities. Above all, though some more than others, I came to understand through my personal encounter, as it were, the inner life of the movement, and I encourage those of you who will be traveling soon that you indeed start this way, to try to get on the inside, to understand the culture, the movement from its followers, its natives, as it were. Now let's put on my scholarly hat, or I will put it on for you. Since my return to the U.S., I've been able to appreciate how congenial the movement is to other countries, including my own. Specifically, I came to appreciate how an understanding, the cross-cultural understanding of the movement is a key and central notion. I would like to point out that I've come to appreciate that this movement is not, to use a word, an overused and misused word, is not a cult. That is an authoritarian movement that dominates and often victimizes followers. Rather, the Gulen movement is religiously inspired, though it is not itself a religion, much less a doctrinaire one. This means that while appreciating the leadership and the role model provided by Fethullah Gulen and others in the Rumi movement, it seems clear that the members do not submissively report to any religious authority figure. Moreover, religiously influential leaders do not attempt to dictate the lives of followers in the movement. The movement is a collectivity, but it's not an easily bounded group. It encourages its dedicated followers to work with each other at a variety of locations to the benefit of members of their own as well as other cultures, especially for those who are in need and victims of the violation of peace. The movement is based, as I say, on the dedication of individuals who, as a matter of principle as well as practical fact, are not subordinate to leaders, but as sharers of the dream, the ideals of the movement. The movement is a service movement, not a political movement. While it has implications for politics, it is not itself a political party, and I think that's one of the really important aspects of it. The movement relies on personal volunteerism and the self-starting piety of its members, believing that serving people is to serve God. The movement is energized by individual motivation rather than being imposed from either spiritually or secular authorities from on high, as it were. It builds upon many levels of excitement and service, from the individual to the institutional to the national and indeed the international and cross-cultural context. Throughout, the goal is that of peace at all levels, from the family to the nation to the ends of the earth, a central tenet and belief that energizes all dedicated members of the movement, such as those who are our hosts this evening. The movement, while inspired by Fethullah Gulen and the role model that he provides specifically, is something of this, and this is a quotation from one of the brochures or articles. It is the duty of the affluent to help others, to assist the weak, unfortunate, underprivileged wayfarers, orphans, widows, and students. Yes, the movement models peace and service, but it also is a champion of science and education in general, not to the exclusion of religion, but as its collaborator in the betterment of the world, as that world faces myriad crises. The movement has mastered the cross-cultural and cross-national academic and intercultural conferences and dialogues. The movement, as I say, is not a cult, though it has many features of religion and religiosity. It champions a non-exclusivist, non-hierarchical organization. As such, it is a marvelous model for democracy and for its implementation. The movement is not, as I say, a political party. The movement is, however, in a long tradition of service units in other religious and cultural traditions. I remember the one I grew up with, maybe somebody else is as old as I am. It was called Moral Rearmament, just after World War II, and so on. A remarkable, though I think remarkably less successful one than the Gulen movement is today. The movement is a remarkably broad and flexible and widely applicable movement. It is able to be emulated here and there and indeed throughout the world. Well, Let me conclude if I can. I trust that you see how important both kinds of knowledge of the movement is key and I think essential. One, the chance to visit and come to know the founders and living representatives of the culture that is the movement, and also the need to continue one's encounter with the movement upon one's return to one's home country. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of the important ways that I have come to appreciate the Gula and Hizmet movement. I am proud to be a member of the board for Marti. Thank you.